People say Greyhollow village was abandoned because of poverty. But that's a lie. The truth is buried in the fog, the kind that moves on its own. It swirls through the empty streets, clinging to the rotting wood of forgotten farms. And sometimes, if you look closely, you can see dark silhouettes twisting inside of it. People who say it's just mist don't know what it is to be hunted. They don't know what happens when the fog gets hungry. And tonight, it woke up again. The air grows cold, the silence deepens, and the shadows begin to stir. Ethan Mercer was driving through the countryside, headed home after visiting family. The winding road was deserted, cutting through endless fields under a moonless sky. It was a long, quiet drive, the kind where your mind starts to wander. But at exactly 9:47 p.m., his engine died. No warning, no sputter. Just a sudden, dead silence. The headlights flickered once, twice, and then went out, plunging him into total darkness. He tried the ignition again and again. Nothing. And then he saw it. A thick gray bank of fog was rolling in across the road, swallowing the fields and the trees, creeping toward his car with an unnatural speed. It wasn't drifting, it was advancing. Through the gloom, he saw a single dim light flickering in the distance. A farmhouse. It was his only hope. He grabbed his phone, no signal, of course, and stepped out into the chilling air. The fog was already wrapping around his ankles, cold and damp. He started walking toward the light, his heart pounding with a strange primal fear he couldn't quite name. He reached the porch of the old farmhouse, the wood groaning under his weight. He knocked, and after a long moment, the door creaked open. An old man stood there, his face as pale as a ghost, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the lantern he was carrying. "Get inside!" the old man rasped, his voice thin and brittle. "The fog's rising!" "It's already too late for you." Ethan, confused but freezing, stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind him, and the old man immediately began barring it with a thick wooden plank. The inside of the house was just as strange. Every window was boarded up tight. Oil lamps cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, making the small room feel like it was breathing. The air was thick with the smell of dust and something else ... Something like old fear. The old man turned to him, his eyes wide with terror. He leaned in and whispered, his voice barely audible, "If you see a shadow move, don't look twice. It only becomes real when you acknowledge it." Ethan just stared at him. This guy was clearly crazy, a paranoid hermit. He just needed to use a phone and get back on the road. Just then, a sound began. A soft tapping on the boarded-up window. Slow, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. It was a rhythmic, patient sound that sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. Against his better judgment, he glanced toward the window. Through a small crack between the boards, he could see something outside. A tall, thin shadow stood there in the fog, but its shape was all wrong. The arms were too long, dangling almost to the ground. The head was tilted at an impossible, broken angle. It was just a silhouette, but it felt ... wrong. Ethan blinked, trying to clear his vision, thinking his eyes were playing tricks on him. But when he opened them, it was closer, pressed right against the window. He gasped, stumbling back. The old man lunged forward and grabbed his arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Dio and to look at it," he screamed, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "You fool! It knows you now!" Before Ethan could process the words, the shadow smashed the window. Wood splintered, glass shattered, and the thick, gray fog flooded into the room like a living thing, cold and suffocating. "Run!" the old man yelled, grabbing his lantern and pulling Ethan toward a back door. They burst out into the night and ran blindly into the fog-drenched fields, guided only by the single, swaying light. The mist was so thick he couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, but he could hear. Footsteps echoed from right behind them, heavy, dragging footsteps. He risked a glance back, but there was nothing there. Just the swirling gray, then came the whispers. Deep, layered voices that seemed to come from every direction at once, calling his name. "Ethan ... Ethan ... It was a chorus of the dead, a sound that vibrated deep in his bones. He stumbled, his lungs burning. "What do they want?" he shouted at the old man. The old man didn't slow down. "They want a soul," he panted. "Only one. Don't let it be you." They finally reached an old, dilapidated farm at the edge of the fields. A rusty gate hung open, groaning in the wind. The sign above it was so faded you could barely make out the word Fogfarm. The fog was thickest here, pooling around a massive, decaying barn like water. As they got closer, Ethan heard a new sound. Something in the barn was breathing. A slow, heavy, wet sound, like a giant beast sleeping in the dark. The old man pushed open the creaking barn doors and shoved Ethan inside. The smell was overwhelming damp earth and decay. As his eyes adjusted to the gloom, he saw them. Dozens of shadow figures clung to the walls and rafters like giant, grotesque insects. They weren't moving, just hanging there, their forms shifting and pulsing in the faint lantern light. "This is where they feed," the old man whispered, his voice trembling. "This is where it all began." Ethan stared at the silent, watching shapes. "What happened here?" he asked, his voice shaking. The old man looked around the barn, his face a mask of old grief. "Greyhollow didn't starve," he said quietly. "It was consumed." As he spoke, terrible images flashed through Ethan's mind, almost like memories that weren't his own. He saw villagers being dragged from their homes, screaming, their bodies dissolving into the fog. He saw the shadows pouring over the houses, covering everything in a blanket of darkness. He heard the screams echoing until there was only silence. "The fog chooses a body each decade," the old man explained, his eyes fixed on Ethan. "Someone has to stay behind to feed it. If no one does, the shadows go hunting beyond the village, looking for new ground." A cold, horrifying realization washed over Ethan. The old man wasn't helping him. He was leading him to slaughter. This wasn't a rescue, it was a sacrifice. And Ethan was the offering. The old man suddenly lunged for the barn door, trying to slam it shut and trap Ethan inside. Ethan reacted instantly, throwing himself forward to block it. "You said they need one soul?" Ethan yelled, his voice filled with betrayal and rage. The old man's face twisted into a desperate snarl. "Better yours than mine," he spat back, putting all his weight into the door. As they struggled, the shadows on the walls began to stir. They detached themselves from the rafters, dropping to the ground with silent thuds. They started to drift forward, their long arms reaching, their featureless faces turning toward the two men. From the center of the barn, the largest one began to rise. It was a towering, monstrous thing, its form blacker than the others, with glowing white cracks spreading across its head where eyes should have been. It was the alpha, the shepherd of this nightmare flock, and it was looking right at them. With a final burst of adrenaline, Ethan shoved the old man aside and sprinted out of the barn. He ran, not daring to look back. The whispers and footsteps pursued him, but he just kept running, his lungs on fire. Ahead, the fog seemed to thin for a moment, a break in the oppressive gray. He thought he was going to make it. He thought he had escaped. He could almost see the road. Then, a hand made of pure smoke and shadow shot out from the ground and grabbed his leg. He fell hard, crying out as the coldness seeped into his skin. A final whisper slithered directly into his ear, a voice made of 1,000 dying breaths. "We claimed you when you first looked at us." The world around him dissolved into blackness. 3 days later, Ethan's car was found abandoned on the side of the road. The door was wide open. There were strange, damp fog stains on the driver's seat. Greyhollow village remains empty, swallowed by the mist. But some nights, late-night drivers swear they see a tall, thin shadow standing by the road, waiting for the next car to break down. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more nightmares.